Hi, fourth grade, it's Mrs. Schaefer. For math today, you will need your textbook and your math notebook and a pencil. We are going to begin on page 418. And the lesson we are going to focus on is lesson 5 of compare and order decimals. So chapter 21, lesson 5, compare and order decimals. We've had a little practice earlier in chapter 21 of comparing our decimals, and that is going to help us in ordering our decimals from least to greatest or greatest to least, depending on what the instructions are asking us to do. Let's begin with our quick review. So please write quick review in your notes. And taking a look at the directions, they say to write an equivalent decimal for each. Remember that you can pause this video at any time to work a problem through, then press play to check your answer from my work. So beginning with number 1, we have 50 hundredths. An equivalent decimal would be 5 tenths. Number 2. An equivalent decimal for 60 hundredths is 6 tenths. Number 3, equivalent decimal for 1 tenth is 10 hundredths. An equivalent decimal for number 4 of 20 hundredths is 2 tenths. And for number 5, 9 tenths, an equivalent decimal would be 90 hundredths. Now let's take a look in our textbook at Learn. We will begin reading at Tunnel Travel. Please read with me. The Brooklyn Battery Tunnel in New York is 1 73/100 miles long. The E. Johnson Memorial Tunnel in Colorado is 1 70/100 miles long. So which tunnel is longer? There are 2 ways that we can compare our decimals. One way is using a number line. So when we've used number lines before, it had 0 to 1 and showing with fractions. But here we're using decimals, and we are starting at 1 5 tenths or 1 1/2 all the way to 2. Now, to show these 2 measures on a number line, we are going to begin with looking at each place value number. So they all start with a 1. And then our next digit is in the tenths place after the decimal point. So here we have 1 7 tenths. But these 2 numbers have hundredths. So in between 1 7 tenths and 1 8 tenths is our hundredths. So each of these little marks have a hundredth value. So this would be as if to say 1 71 hundredths, 1 72 hundredths, 1 73 hundredths, 1 74 hundredths, and so on until you get to 1 8 tenths. So to plot the first one, 1 70 hundredths, it's done for you. It's an equivalent decimal. 1 7 tenths is the same as 1 70 hundredths. Then the next plot is 1 73 hundredths. And as we did this a little bit ago, that each one had a value of 100th. So then this is 1 71 hundredths, 72 hundredths, 1 73 hundredths, and there is our plot. So when we compare, which tunnel is longer? It would be the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel in New York. Now, another way to compare, in a lesson that I showed you before when we didn't have materials available to us or hands-on materials, I showed you how to compare decimals when lining them up on top of one another. So here we have the place value to compare our ones. These are the same. Then we went to the tenths, and those are the same. And then when we compare in the hundredths, we have that 3 is greater than 0. So this value of 1 73 hundredths is greater than 1 70 hundredths. Okay, the best way to compare is lining up these decimals and then going by each place value and comparing them there. And we still have the same answer, that the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel of 1 73 hundredths is longer than the E. Johnson Memorial Tunnel in Colorado at 1 70 hundredths miles long. Let's take a look at the example. So here in the example, they showed you another way, well, not another way, but another two numbers to compare using the place value system. So they have these two numbers, 0 and 316 thousandths and 0 and 398 thousandths. So we start all the way to the left, just like reading a book. We read numbers from left to right. So we start in the greatest place value, and we have the ones, and there's nothing there. Then we move to the tenths. Both numbers in the same tenths place value is a 3, so those are the same. We move to the next place value. In the hundredths, we have 1 and 9. So we know that 1 is less than 9. So this number on the top is smaller than this number on the bottom because 1 is smaller than 9. And once we get to that place value, we don't have to keep going. So once we have two numbers that are different when we go from left to right, then you are done comparing. So here we have that since 1 is less than 9, 316 thousandths is less than 398 thousandths. Now let's take a look on page 419. So what we just learned before was how to compare numbers. Now here is how we order decimals. Something I want you to remember, that on a number line, the numbers to the right are always greater than the numbers to the left on a number line all the time. Now, I want you to know that in this lesson, number lines will be provided for you. You will not be expected to make your own number line. So let's look at one way to order decimals using a number line. Use a number line to order decimals. So we have these three numbers that we are going to order from greatest to least: 9 and 4 tenths, 9 and 63 hundredths, and 9 and 27 hundredths. So let's read our number line first before we start plotting them on our number line to order them. If you notice, all of your whole numbers begin with a number 9. Then your tenths are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Remember that in between each tenth place value is a hundredth place value. So starting here, this is 9 and 2 tenths, or 9 and 20 hundredths, equivalent decimal. Then continuing 9 and 21 hundredths, 9 and 22 hundredths, 9 and 23 hundredths, 9 and 24 hundredths, and so on. So let's take a look at our first number that we need to plot. 9 and 4 tenths. Well, that's easy to find. It's already here on the number line, so we put it here. Let's look at the next number, 9 and 63 hundredths. So I know that all of my whole numbers begin with a number 9. Then I have to look at my next place value, a 6. So I need to find 9 and 6 tenths on my number line. Here it is. This number is 9 63/100ths. So remember, each little line is a hundredth value. So this is 9 60/100ths, 9 61/100ths, 9 62/100ths, and 9 63/100ths. And this plot right here on the number line. Now we have 9 27/100ths. So we are looking at our whole number first, then our tenths, which is a value of 2. So we are looking for 9 2/10, which is right here at the beginning. Then we are going to keep counting on until we reach to 27 or 27/100ths. 9 21/100ths, 22/100ths, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. So here is 9 27/100ths. Now, once you have them all plotted on the number line, then you can see from greatest to least, starting from the right, that this number is our biggest of 9 63/100ths, then 9 4/10ths, then last 9 27/100ths. Now, the other way to compare is lining up your place values by the decimal. So we have these three numbers, 1 23/100ths, 98/100ths, and 1 28/100ths. But this time they want us to order it from least to greatest. So in step 1, we are going to line up the decimal points so they're all in line with one another, and then compare the digits in the greatest place value. So we start from the left and move to the right. Remember, we want to order them from least to greatest. So when we compare in our ones column, which is the smallest number? 0. 0 is less than 1. So because 0 is less than 1, 98/100ths is our least number. Now, in step 2, we can take out that least number because we know that's the smallest, so we only have 2 numbers left to compare. We already compared our ones, so we're moving on to our tenths. In our tenths place value, we have 2s. And since they are both of the same number, the same value, then we move on to the next place value, which is the hundredths, as they show in step 3. Then we're going to compare the hundredths place value. We have a 3 and an 8. Remember, we are ordering this from least to greatest. So which number is smaller, the 3 or 8? The 3. So since the 3 is less than 8, 1 23/100ths would be the next smallest number. Then 1 28/100ths would be the greatest number. So the order from least to greatest is 98/100ths, 1 23/100ths, 1 28/100ths. Nice job. Let's move on to page 420. Once you are on page 420, we're going to begin with our check. We are going to begin with numbers 2 through 6, and then 7 and 8. And then we will move on to the practice. So first, let's begin by writing check in our notes. For the directions for numbers 2 through 6 of our check, it says to compare. Write less than, greater than, or equal to for each gray circle. So for number 2, they give us 2 numbers. We have 45/100ths comparing with 35/100ths. Now, as we learned in our lesson, we can line these up. So we will put the first decimal number, and lining up our decimals, we'll put the second decimal number. And then let's compare, starting with our greatest place value all the way to the left with our ones. They're both zeros, so since those are the same, we are done with those. Now we have a 4 and a 3. Which one is bigger? The 4. So this number of 45 hundredths is greater than 35 hundredths. Number 3. I have 5 tenths. Compare it with 7 tenths. Line up your decimals to compare. In our ones, they're both the same. And we have a 5 and a 7. Which one's bigger? The 7. So the 5 tenths is less than 7 tenths. Number 4. We have 3 hundredths comparing to 30 hundredths. Let's line up our decimal numbers. So here we have zeros and the ones. Then we have a 0 and a 3. Which one is bigger? The 3. So that means the 3 hundredths is less than 30 hundredths. Number 5. I have 5 and 4 tenths comparing with 5 and 243 thousandths. Let's line up our decimals. And then compare. In our ones column, they're both the same. In our tenths, we have a 4 and a 2. Which one is bigger? The 4. So 5 and 4 tenths is greater than 5 and 243 thousandths. Just because this number looks bigger does not mean that it is a bigger number. This is a decimal, not a comma. So you have to go by each place value to find which one is bigger and which one is smaller. Number 6. We have 1 and 36 thousandths comparing with 1 and 308 thousandths. So let's line up our decimals. Make sure that you copy your numbers precisely or you could get it wrong. Starting in our ones column, they're both the same. Then move to the tenths. We have a 0 and a 3. Which one is bigger? The 3. So 1 and 36 thousandths is less than 1 and 308 thousandths. Nice job. Now let's move on to numbers 7 and 8, where we have to use a number line to order the decimals from least to greatest. So we have to look at our textbook and plot those numbers. So I'm going to be flopping back and forth from my textbook and the notebook quite a bit for this. So first I'm going to write number 7 in my notes. And then let's look at our textbook.
Are you done with your video?
We are given 4 decimal numbers. We have 2 and 1 hundredth, 2 and 10 hundredths, 2 and 2 tenths, 2 and 2 hundredths. So here is our number line. Notice that on our number line, it starts from 2 to 3. So 3 is our greatest. At the right, going all the way to 2 as our least. And we are going to order all of these 4 numbers from least to greatest. So let's compare them by putting them on our line. So they all begin with a number 2, okay? And next we want to look at the next place value. So we have a 0, a 1, a 2, and a 0. Which is smallest? Our zeros. So let's compare 2 and 100th and 2 and 200ths. Which one would be smaller? The 1 or the 2? You are correct if you said 1. So we are going to write this number on as if we were to put it on our number line. It would go right here because this is 2, and the next one would be 2 and 100th. Let's write that in our notes. 2 and 100th. Once this number is on a plot of the number line, we had the other number we were comparing. It was 2 and 200ths. So this number would be written next in our notes. 2 and 200ths. So 2 and 100th would be here. 2 and 200ths would be right next to it. We have 2 other numbers to compare. 2 and 1000ths and 2 and 200ths. So we're going to go back to compare these. We know that our ones are the same. So let's look at our tenths. We have a 1 and a 2. Which one is smaller? The 1. What is an equivalent fraction? Oh, see, I almost said fraction. What's an equivalent decimal for 2 and 10 hundredths? 2 and 1/10. Very good. So our next plot would be right here. So let's put this number next in our notes. 2 and 1000ths. Then the last one is always easiest, but let's put it on our a number line just to make sure. So we have 2 and 2/10. Here was 2 and 1/10 or 2 and 1000ths, and then we found the same right here. So this would be our greatest number of 2 and 2/10. Let's write that in our notes. 2 and 2/10. And that's it for number 7. Now let's take a look at number 8. So number 8, and then let's look in our book. Now looking at number 8, we have these 4 numbers. 2 and 7/10ths, 2 and 6700ths, 2 and 7600ths, and 2 and 6/10ths. So if you were like me and you made little plots on your number line and you used pencil, you can easily erase, and that's okay. Now, notice that all of our decimals, when we compare, starting in the ones, they all start with a 2. So we're going to look at the tenths value. And remember, from least to greatest. So we have a 7, a 6, a 7, and a 6. So which one is smaller, 6 or 7? 6. So we have these 2 numbers, 2 and 6700ths and 2 and 6/10ths. When you look at these 2 place values, they're both the same. So let's compare the hundredths. Here we have a 7, and here we have an invisible 0. So which is smaller, the 7 or 0? The 0. So we would plot 2 and 6/10ths on our number line first. And let's put that in our notes. 2 6/10. Back in our textbook, the other number we were comparing to was 2 67/100. Remember that in between each number of tenths is hundredths. So if this is 2 60/100, this is 2 61/100, 2 62/100, and let's count on 63, 64, 65, 66, 67. So this little tick mark here is where our plot of 2 67/100 would go. Let's write that in our notes. 2 67/100. Lovely. Now we have two numbers left to compare. 2 7/10 and 2 76/100. So we already compared with our ones. We compared with our tenths place, and they're both sevens. So we moved to the hundredths. Invisible 0 and 6. So which one is smaller, 0 or 6? 0. So 2 7/10. Let's find that on our number line right here. And then now we can put this in our notes. 2 7/10. The last number that we have is 2 76/100. Remember that hundredths values are in between the tenths. So here we have 2 7/10, 2 71/100, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76. And that is where we will put our 2 76/100 on our number line. And let's put that in our notes. 2 76/100. Now that we have finished with our check, let's take a look at our practice. Numbers 9 through 16 is comparing with less than, greater than, or equal to in the gray circles with two numbers. We've had plenty of practice in our check. With numbers 17 through 19, use the number line above to order the decimals from least to greatest. We've had practice with that as well. So what I would like for us to try is numbers 20 through 25. So please write practice in your notes. So practice. And let's begin with number 20. So looking in our textbook, we are going to copy those numbers exactly from the book to our notes. We have 1 4/100, 4 11/100, 41/100, and 1 40/100. Remember that the directions say to order from greatest to least. So we are going to start in our ones. And when you compare, which one is the biggest number? The 4. So here we will write 4 11/100. I'm going to cross this out. Then I can compare with my other 3 decimal numbers. Then I'm looking for the next greatest number. So here I have a 1, a 0, and a 1. This 0 would be the smallest, so this would be my last number that I would write. So I'm going to compare these two numbers, and since they both have a 1, I'm going to cross them out and look at the next place value. Here I have a 0 in the tenths and a 4 in the tenths. Sorry for Anna distracting me. I don't know what I said last. So I'm going to compare the tenths with my 0 and my 4, and I'm looking for my next greatest number, which would be the 4. So I would write this whole decimal number next. 1 and 40 hundredths. Then I know this would be my next biggest number, 1 and 4 hundredths. And cross that out so I don't use it. And then this is my last number, and that would be my smallest of 41 hundredths. Let's take a look at one more. Let's look at 22. So I'm going to write 22 in my notes and then write each decimal number down. So I have 4 and 8 hundredths, 4 and 3 tenths, 4 and 803 thousandths, then 4 and 38 thousandths. Now I'm going to order them from greatest to least, starting in my ones. They're all the same. So I'm going to cross them all out. Then I move to the next place value, my tenths, and look to see which one is my next biggest number. It would be my 8. So I'm going to write this whole decimal number first. 4 and 803 thousandths. Cross it off because I don't need it anymore. Now I'm still going to compare in my tenths place value for my next biggest number. So I have a 0, a 3, and a 0. 3 is obviously bigger than 0, so I would write this number down. 4 and 3 tenths. Now I have zeros in my tenths column, and since they are the same, I have to move to the next place value. So in my hundredths, I have an 8, and then I have a 3. So which one's bigger? The 8. So I would write 4 and 8 hundredths next. Cross that off, and the last number I didn't use. I don't have enough room, so I'm going to put it down here of 4 and 38 thousandths would be my smallest